Hello everyone, my name is Rob, welcome to Kinetic Rugby League. In this video I'm going to be giving you my Super League Round 2 power rankings. Now I'm going to do something that no YouTuber should ever do, and I'm going to ruin my audience retention rate, okay? And I'm going to spoil the video. There have been no changes to last week's power rankings. Absolutely none. Are there things to discuss about teams? Yes. So that's what I'm going to focus on in this video. So if you saw my power rankings last week, there will be no changes, but we can at least discuss the teams and talk about how there's been at least a little bit of a shift. So let's crack on with 12th place. So still in 12th place is going to be the London Broncos. They just don't really have much going forwards and unfortunately are very weak in defence. There is a positive to how this season started. I always want to try and look at the positives when possible. The positive that I see for the London Broncos is that they've been thrown into the deep end with these first two games. You know, it's a tough ask for any team to have to play against St. Helens in round 1 and Catalans in round 2. That's a tough ask for anybody, and you've asked the Broncos to do it in their first time in Super League in God knows how many years. And given the situation they're in, the positive is it could allow them to get used to the pace of the game quicker, so that when they do come up against a slightly weaker opponent, whether they're weaker defensively or in terms of attack, the Broncos can hopefully learn a lot from those first two games, feel more comfortable with the pace of it, and then if they get the likes of Hull FC, who's looking a bit weaker, or Castleford, or maybe Warrington or Lee, or any team in the midfield that's a bit shaky, that they can start putting some more points on the board, and they can start holding off some teams from scoring insane numbers of points. So there isn't too much to be said. Now, I did put in a bet Tom Johnston to score any time, and that's because the Broncos conceded half of their tries from their right-hand side defensively. Of the 8 they conceded, 4 of them were on the right-hand side. So I assume that Tom Johnston could probably get some points. But what I'm at least reading from the fact that he didn't score, and it only really started and ended with Tariq Sims, indicates to me that teams don't need to spread the ball as much. They're much weaker in the middle, which is, is pretty obvious, but it at least indicates that teams don't need to spread the ball as much. If they can solidify the middle a little bit more, and that will come with fitness and getting used to the pace of the game, that will force teams to have to spread the ball more, execute on point, and if they force teams to have to keep going out wide, to have to keep going around them, there's going to be times where they knock players out of play, turn over the ball, get good field position, and slowly start to chip away at teams. So as much as it's been a really difficult start, I think it's a good positive to learn and get to grips with the pace of the game as soon as possible. But London Broncos in 12th. Taking a look at 11th place, it's still going to be the Castleford Tigers. I will say their resilience against Salford was unexpected, but not too bad. Now maybe that means I need to rethink what Salford might be as a team, but again, it's still early. But I wasn't expecting Castleford to stay in that game. I predicted 26-6 to Salford. I didn't think Castleford would be able to put up as many points as they did. So to be fair to them, it was a pretty resilient effort, especially to stay in that game and not let the game get away from them. There was a 10-point lead at one point for Salford, but towards the back end of the game, they really pushed, tried to fight to get back into it. So fair play to them. It maybe reduces the gap to 10th place a tiny bit, a very tiny bit, but not enough to overtake 10th place. And of course, I'll get into the reasons for that when I move on to the next team. But pleasantly surprised by the effort from Castleford. I think they can beat London. They could challenge Hull, possibly Warrington. They're still a bit of a question mark at the moment. Lee will have to see after a few more rounds. And maybe question marks over Huddersfield after their performance against Saints, but we'll have to see. If they played Salford again, maybe there's the chance of a challenge. But I don't see this Castleford team really giving many of the top 5 teams in my power rankings much of a challenge. So, Castleford Tigers still in 11th. Moving on to 10th place is still going to be Hull FC. I will also say that first of all, Hull FC fans, as a Wire fan, I feel for you. I really do. I really, really do. The good news is, from what I believe I read earlier, is that Farmani Brown isn't going to miss out on the next game. So he should be available. I think it was Robert Hicks that decided to overrule that. Not 100% sure on that one, don't quote me on it. But I think there's a chance that he's going to be available for the next game, which is good. It's one of the most ridiculous cards I've ever seen. Actually, no, it is the most ridiculous card I've ever seen in Rugby League. Hands down. It's not even a debate. I don't know why I said might be. Or one of the. It is the most ridiculous card I've ever seen. But when Hull were a man down, I think they dealt with it pretty well. They even put up some points. So they got their first points of the season. And then being a man down, they made it happen. It was a little bit of a scruffy moment, you know, with a kick that was deflected. But when they recovered the ball, they executed well in the off-the-cuff moments and came up with another try. So fair play to Hull in making that happen. They were quite resilient. They, you know, having to lose a player after something like that is ridiculous and must be a huge kick in the teeth and just be so demoralising to the rest of the squad, knowing that you're a man down because of that. Really? You're a man down because of that. But the way that they battled, they got on with it. The scoreline didn't look great, but I think that they put in a very resilient performance, showed that they do have some creative sparks in there. So, still nothing to sing and dance about, but I think 10th is about right for Hull FC still. Moving on to 9th place now, and I still have the Warrington Wolves in that position. For me, they are a bit of a question mark, and I will say the main reason for that is I didn't see enough from them against Hull FC to warrant moving them up a place. And they could have moved up a place over the next team, which you may already know. But the fact that when it was 13-13 against Hull, it was still a close game. The attack was still very one-dimensional. The kicking game was okay. But I will also say, missing out on George Williams is always going to be a big miss. Throwing Leon Hayes in there, I mean, he knew in advance that he was going to be starting, but he's still very fresh. I think that was his third Super League start or game in general. And he did a pretty decent job. I think the forward pack still remains really, really strong on the side of Warrington. Defensively, there's some problems there on that right-hand side with Connor Wrench. It's a little bit questionable. I think Toby King had some big tackles to stop some chances on that left-hand side. But that side, the right-hand side with Connor Wrench and Lindup when he was starting last week, and Thulis. Thulis made a huge tackle, by the way. He is so impressive for how young he is. He's got plenty of experience at this point, but he's such an impressive player. But yeah, that right-hand side defensively for Warrington looks a little bit shaky. The forward pack looks good. I will say, and let me just rant on a little bit here as a Wire fan, James Harrison was brought in, I'm assuming, by Powell and the club to be like the next Chris Hill. So you had Chris Lightval, he was around for a bit, and then you had Adrian Morley was the next number 8 that was around for a bit, and then it was Chris Hill was the next number 8 that was around for a bit. The impression I get is that they're hoping that James Harrison is the next Morley/Hill. Not that he'll ever replicate it, but he's like the staple of the forward pack, basically, that's going to be around for a while. He's only 26, 27, I think. But I've yet to see a game from him where I think, wow, he's dominating the forward pack. Max Wood had less than 10 carries, somewhere between 5 and 10 carries. And all of them, I think all of them, were impressive, and he actually dragged players and made extra meters. So everything I've been hoping to see from James Harrison these last 2 or 3 seasons, I've not seen at all, and we got that in one game from Max Wood. I have no problems with Max Wood starting alongside Vaughan next week. No problems whatsoever. So, great signs for a 19-year-old. I believe he's 19, but instantly gets in the squad for me. Instantly. So the forward pack looks good for Warrington. Defensively on the right, they're shaky, but still a question mark in attack once we see a proper 13v13 for 80 minutes. And there's a bit more expansive play. maybe give Leon Hayes a couple of weeks to kind of bed himself in whilst Williams is out for a month or so. But I think 9th place is pretty realistic for Warrington right now until we know a bit more about them and the team above them. Still in 8th place are the Lee Leopards. It's very difficult to really say where they are right now. It was possible for me to drop them down. I couldn't put them above Huddersfield considering they already played Huddersfield, were a little bit sluggish. Yes, there was 2 sin bins in that game from what I recall, and Huddersfield weren't particularly great against St Helens, to say the least. But there's no reason for me to move them up or down. Once we see them this coming week, I'll have a much better idea. Given that squad on paper, you expect a lot. I believe Edwin Ipape is out for a very long time, so that's going to be a huge miss. But I still fully believe that O'Brien, Lamb and Moylan is going to be a dangerous trio. Really, really dangerous. So we'll have to see how that kind of works itself out. I think it's good that they've added some depth. The forward pack are going to be under a lot of pressure because I don't know if they've got too many great replacements. So they could be wearing thin at some point. If they can maybe, I'm not sure when the deadline is for bringing players in, but if they're able to bring some people in, that would be really, really good. And at the time of recording now, I've only recently seen that they've brought in Brad Dwyer from Warrington on a 2-week loan, which I'd imagine would probably be extended to maybe a few months, because I think they're going to need him for a bit longer than 2 weeks. If, he's surplus to requirements after 2 weeks, fair enough, but I think it's a good addition. I think he's a very energetic player, was very underrated, was maybe harshly critiqued by Hull FC fans, but they can correct me if I'm wrong on that one from last season. But I think he certainly has something to offer, and maybe something to prove as well. And I think Lee's a good place to do that. But right now, Lee Leopards are in 8th place. Remaining in 7th place is going to be the Huddersfield Giants. What an abysmal effort versus Saints. I almost had a little bit of faith in them, not to beat Saints, but to compete against Saints. I understand that my prediction, 32-10 in favour of St Helens, indicates that maybe I don't have that much belief in Huddersfield. But when I gave my bet on TikTok, I said I'm going to go with Saints to win. I'm not going to take the 9.5 point handicap that Saints had. I'm going to take them to win, only because we don't know enough about this Huddersfield Giants team, and maybe they could throw up something a little bit tricky. Just didn't happen. It just didn't happen. Now, that it may be an indication of St Helens being better than I thought they were. Still top 2 at the absolute minimum, but Huddersfield, you just can't do that. You cannot allow that to happen. To be nilled, I understand it's Saints, and they're looking pretty strong in terms of their squad. They look strong on paper, but you just can't be losing like that. Especially with the personnel that you brought in. Clune, I was expecting to produce a lot more, even in big games like this. But it's not enough just yet for me to put them below Lee. But it's very close. Depending on next week's performances, if it's lackluster again and Lee has anything somewhat decent, then there's going to be a change in position there. But Huddersfield, I had somewhat high hopes. Just in a half-decent challenge. And maybe they can turn things around next week. They might just be one of those midfield teams that's really inconsistent. But 7th feels about right. Could drop to 8th next week, but 7th is about right. Moving on to 6th place, I have the Salford Red Devils. As I mentioned towards Castleford Tigers, I think their resilience was really good. But on the side of Salford, maybe in a negative light, you shouldn't really be allowing that against a team with that kind of squad that doesn't really have an overwhelming amount of quality in there. I think Richardson and Miller is not too bad as a halfback pairing. It's not too bad, but I keep going on about the spine, but the spine of Salford just, I don't know. I mean, the whole team, of course, the spine isn't solely responsible for defence. I understand that. But, I don't know, just the try they conceded at the end was just a lack of concentration and technique, not wrapping that ball up, allowing Nixon Putt just to get the ball out. Just wasn't good enough in that moment. But I think just overall as a team performance, maybe shouldn't have allowed Castleford into the game that much. And they should have really let it get away. They had a 12-0 lead. They should have really run away with that one. I do think that they'll be fine. They'll have their, they'll have their dips throughout the season. And I think they'll still have moments where they'll challenge teams in the top 4. I think they can certainly do that with the squad they've got. And they are still learning. With Cade Cust in there, he's different to Brodie Croft. And the new kid, I can't remember what his name is because I've never really heard of him before. I'll apologise on that one. But to have him replacing Andy Ackers, who was vital to that team, Salford fans can educate me on him as a player, hopefully. But I think Salford, 6th. All the teams below them make complete sense right now. Maybe Lee and Warrington next week could really push them for 7th and 6th place, but I don't see Salford that close to 5th right now, unless they're absolutely on it and these top 5 teams start dropping off a little bit and having some slightly shaky performances. I think Salford right now are just in a group of 1, just on their own, with a decent gap to Huddersfield and a somewhat decent gap to 5th place. So let's take a look at 5th place. So looking at 5th is the Leeds Rhinos. And I would say, after their performance against Hull Kingston Rovers, dealing with the sin bins that they had, and being as competitive as they were, I understand the pitch conditions maybe balances things out. I did say it would be quite a balanced game. But they stuck in that game for a lot of it. They look pretty decent in attack. It's a great try between Brodie Croft and Ash Handley. I think Ash Handley is... God, he's brilliant. He is brilliant. But Leeds, it was a much stronger performance for me. And last week, I believe I mentioned about there being a gap to the top 4. For me, they certainly closed that gap a little bit. Nothing that says that they're right on the heels of the Dragons just yet, who were 4th last week. But they've certainly made a big step forward. And on paper, that lead squad looks really, really good. And there's still a lot to learn with that spine there. And especially, I need to make sure I remember this. I cannot remember the player's name. I want to say it was Dooley. I'm not 100% sure, but the fullback that was thrown in because of Lachlan Miller's illness, he was thrown into it and was pretty reliable. I think there was only one mistake in that game. But the thing is, when you're a kid that's thrown in last minute, there are probably... If I was a coach and I had to do that, if I was Rowan Smith in that scenario, I'd tell him that there's 3 things I want from him. Just 3. Number 1, run hard. Number 2, tackle hard. Number 3, just try and catch the ball. That's it. Because they weren't expecting anything fancy. He's probably not been training in those attacking processes and defensive processes. So the minimum I want from him, run hard, tackle hard, and just try and be reliable at the back. And for the most part, he was those 3 things. He ran hard, tackled hard when he needed to get involved, and was pretty reliable. He looked a lot more stable than Petter Hiku did for a lot of that first half especially. Now, there's just that one moment where, he didn't quite time the run onto the ball and his positioning, didn't quite read the drop of the ball, and it was a knock-on. So really unfortunate for him, but great experience. And overall for Leeds, it was always going to be difficult missing out on a player like Lachlan Miller because he can influence games, but not too bad an effort from Leeds. Of course, they would have liked the win, and they'll feel a little bit hard done by having to receive those sin bins, but not too bad. Not too bad. Still in 4th place are the Catalan Dragons. I think, based on the fact that playing against the Broncos is a little bit of a gimme for all these at least half-decent teams right now. I can still go off their resilience against Warrington in round 1. And that kind of scoreline is something that you would expect anyway. I mean, I predicted 36-0 and it was 34-0. So I expected around that score anyway. If it was a little bit less, or maybe even a bit more than a little bit, like 10 points less, maybe 12, then I'd say, hang on, they should have really been putting up more points than that. But the fact that they were around what I expected leads me to believe that they are still the team that I assumed they were from round 1. They still are resilient in defence. It's pretty much going to have just been a fitness session for them, as it was for Saints in round 1. But in attack, still efficient, finding holes pretty easily. Theo Farge had a decent game, I think. Still one of the most underrated halfbacks in Super League. I think any team would be lucky to have him, to be honest. But Catalans, not too much to say on them. I think we need to see a few more challenging games. See them play against Hull, Saints, Wigan. Maybe, throw a game against Salford in there, might be interesting. But a few more games to see from Catalans until I can definitely put them a little bit higher. But they're looking alright. Moving on to the top 3 now. In third place still is the Hull Kingston Rovers. I think they put in a good effort against Leeds. Really tricky pitch conditions, as I said, for that game. They just seemed to have a little bit more control. There was some points where discipline was an issue, but they managed to get a hold of it for at least a good portion of that game, which allowed them to start to run away with it. Maybe with the man advantages that they had, they could have been maybe just a little bit more ruthless, but I did expect the game to be quite well balanced and a bit of a tough one, and the gap was about what I predicted. So for me, there's no reason to put Hull KR in the top 2. I don't think they're quite there yet, but there's absolutely no reason from that game against Leeds, considering the situation they were put in. I don't think there's any reason to drop them lower down, and I don't think the gap to Catalans gets any bigger or smaller. I think it stays about the same for me. So I like the feeling around Hull KR right now. And it must be pretty good being a Hull KR fan. Especially with all the, maybe over the last decade having some pretty poor seasons, not competing for playoffs, and then just being a regular competitor. It hasn't come with trophies yet, but every club just wants the right to compete, and that's what Hull KR have at the moment in the last couple of years. They're in a position to compete. They're putting themselves in good positions. They look like a team that can go at anybody and that can take a lot of weight from any team. So it's just about perfecting that, grinding week after week, and when we start seeing them against Saints and against Wigan, we'll really know what this team's made of. Until then, third is perfect for Hull KR. Moving on to second place now, and still there, is St Helens. There isn't too much to say on this. And when I talk about the team in first place, as obvious as it may be, I'm not going to say the name. I'm going to maybe keep it a little surprise, see if you can guess who it is. But the only reason why St Helens aren't in first after that kind of performance is because of the quality of opponent that first place had to play against this weekend. That is it. If the team in first place didn't have a game, I would highly consider putting Saints first. Now you might think, well, it's Super League power rankings, and technically the team in first place didn't play a Super League game, but you can't ignore the fact that that game actually happened, because it's evidence towards why the team in first place is going to remain in first place. So there's not really too much to say about Saints, other than the squad looks really strong. Darryl Clark is making me miss him more and more every single week. How dare you, Darryl? How dare you? But he's fitting really, really well. Business resumes with Dodd, with Lomax. The forward pack's really strong. They're really efficient in attack and defence. They're just they are somewhat worthy of a first place position in these power rankings, if not for the opponents that first place actually played this weekend. But let's finally reveal who's in first place. And once again, to the surprise of absolutely nobody, it is the Wigan Warriors in first place, the non-movers. I'm not going to talk too much about the controversy from the World Club Challenge, but first of all, they were the strongest team on paper last season. This season they had a couple changes, and they still look really strong. I think the gap to St Helens is still about the same. Now, yes, there's controversy from the World Club Challenge, but take the controversy out of the game, and what we can say about Wigan is that they competed with the Penrith Panthers for 80 minutes. So even if you want to give Penrith a try because of a decision, or remove a try from Wigan because of a decision, at the end of the day, Wigan competed with the Penrith Panthers for 80 minutes. What else do you want from them? Now, as far as I'm aware, and this is poor research on my part, I don't think Luai was in that game. They had to play with somebody else that I'd actually never heard of before. So that would have taken a lot of sting out of the left side attack for the Panthers, because Luai's, when he starts to step in from his left foot onto his right, he's pretty dangerous. I know Nathan Cleary can play both sides of the field, but Jerome Luai's a big miss in that position. But the rest of the team is still exceptionally strong, and Wigan kept up with them and still beat them. I need to actually watch the highlights back and take a look at these moments, but all that was enough for me to keep them as number one is the fact they competed with them. And they were still dominant against Castleford in week 1. Next week should be fairly simple for them, so we'll have to see how that one goes. But when Wigan play Saints, those two teams, they've got a fairly big gap to Hull KR, if I'm honest. So when these two play against each other, it's going to be a hell of a game, and I am excited to see that. I'm not sure what round it is, but I hope it comes soon, because those two are looking really good right now. But for me, Wigan Warriors still in number 1. So that's going to be it for my Super League Round 2 power rankings. If you have any comments on any teams that I've kind of missed out and what could be a huge influence over changing this list, do let me know in the comments down below. If you have your own rankings, also do let me know. I'm always happy to learn about, other people's opinions and what they have to say about their own teams. I only know so much about certain clubs, so I'm always happy to be educated. But that's going to be it for this video. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.